Clean faster, you useless woman. Marcus Vance's voice cracked across the 42nd floor like a whip. The coffee cup he'd hurled shattered against the marble, splashing French roast onto Diane Carter's gray uniform. 23 executives froze mid-stride in the hallway of Vance Technologies, the $18 billion empire he'd built on the bones of better men. Diane didn't flinch. She set down her mop, walked 3 steps closer to the most feared CEO in Silicon Valley, and whispered 7 words into his ear. Marcus Vance, Forbes cover, private island, 4 ex-wives, felt his knees buckle. His hand gripped the edge of his desk to keep from collapsing. Because what the cleaning woman just whispered told him she knew exactly who he'd murdered 14 years ago. 6 years earlier, Diane Carter walked into the lobby of Vance Tower carrying a vacuum cleaner and a folded Ursum she'd never show anyone. 61 years old. Knees that ached every morning. A reading glasses prescription she couldn't afford to update. The marble lobby alone, Calicut from Italy, 3 stories tall, suspended sculpture by an artist whose name she didn't know costing more than her childhood home in Oakland, made her stomach turn. She knew this building. She'd helped sketch the original blueprints on her son's kitchen table when he was 26 years old and full of fire. Back when it was supposed to be called Carter Labs. Back when her son Elijah was still alive. Diane had a PhD in computer engineering from Stanford, 28 years at Lockheed before retirement. 3 patents in cryptographic security still earning royalties she funneled into her grandson's college fund. She'd taught Elijah everything he knew about systems architecture before he was 10 years old. But none of that mattered now. The hospital bills from Elijah's accident, the one that had happened 3 days after he discovered Marcus Vance was stealing his code, had eaten through her savings. Her daughter-in-law had moved to Atlanta. Her grandson was at Howard on scholarship, but textbooks alone ran $4,000 a semester. So Diane Carter, who'd presented research papers at MIT, took the night shift custodial job at the company her son had built. She wore the gray uniform, she kept her head down. And she waited. Marcus Vance built his empire from one stolen idea. Officially, the story went like this. Brilliant young entrepreneur from Connecticut, Yale dropout, founded Vance Technologies in 2011 with a revolutionary encryption algorithm. Took the company public at 28. Became the youngest tech billionaire on the Forbes list. $18 billion. 6 homes across 3 continents. A yacht named Imperator docked permanently in Monaco. He gave TED Talks about innovation. He lectured at Stanford about meritocracy. He had a custom Patek Philippe for every day of the week. But the algorithm wasn't his. It had belonged to Elijah Carter, a brilliant black engineer from Oakland who'd hired Marcus Vance as his junior partner in 2010. 3 days after Elijah confronted Marcus about the patent filings, Elijah was found dead at the bottom of a parking garage stairwell in San Jose. Police called it an accident. Marcus took control of the company within a week. Within a year, every trace of Elijah Carter had been erased from the founding documents. Every weeknight at 10:47 p.m., Diane emptied the trash in Marcus Vance's corner office. He never looked up, never said good evening. He sat at the desk her son had once designed, the same desk, just refinished, and worked on his laptop, sometimes shouting into headsets at terrified employees in Tokyo or London. Diane learned his patterns. Tuesday nights he stayed until midnight. Thursday nights he left at 9. Friday afternoons his current girlfriend visited and they'd argue about money. Saturdays, he came in alone and reviewed files he kept in a locked drawer. The bottom left drawer of his desk. The one even his executive assistant wasn't allowed to touch. Diane knew the lock model. She'd helped Elijah pick out the original desk 17 years ago. She knew exactly how that drawer opened. For the first 4 years, Diane did nothing but watch. She memorized Marcus's calendar. She studied the building's security rotations. She learned which executives stayed late, which janitors took shortcuts, which security guards drank on duty. She befriended Henrietta in HR, who pitied the older black cleaning woman and slipped her copies of internal memos no janitor should ever see. She befriended Jin Soo in it, who taught her, as if she didn't already know, how the company's mainframe was structured. She befriended Patricia in legal, who complained constantly about Marcus's frankly disturbing insistence that certain files from the company's founding remain physically sealed in his desk and never digitized. Diane nodded sympathetically each time. She remembered every word. In the 5th year, things started to shift inside Vance Technologies. Marcus began drinking earlier. The TED Talk smile cracked around the edges. A whistleblower at a competing firm had begun asking questions about the original 2011 patent filings. A journalist from Wired had been calling the SEC. Diane noticed because Marcus started shredding documents himself at night instead of leaving them for the office shredder. He started staying later, then leaving earlier. Twice, she found him asleep at his desk at 11 p.m., the bottom left drawer open, a manila folder spread across his keyboard. She didn't look. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But she made one decision. She stopped letting her shift end at 11 p.m. She volunteered for the overnight rotation. She made herself invisible and indispensable. And she waited for him to make one mistake. The mistake came on a Tuesday in March. Marcus had a 7 a.m. flight to Davos and had left in a hurry at 6 p.m. He'd been drinking. Diane could smell the bourbon on his breath when she passed him in the corridor. He hadn't locked his office. He hadn't locked the bottom left drawer. And inside that drawer, in a manila folder labeled only with the year 2010, Diane found what she'd waited 6 years to find. The original patent filings, dated November 2010, in her son's handwriting. The transfer documents, signed under duress on December 3, 2010, 3 days before Elijah died. A memo to Marcus's then lawyer, dated December 6th, the day after Elijah's death, reading simply, "Carter problem resolved. Move forward with restructuring." And underneath all of that, in a sealed envelope, photographs Diane had to sit down to look at. Photographs of a parking garage stairwell in San Jose. Photographs Marcus Vance should never have possessed, because they had been taken by the man who pushed her son down those stairs. Diane photographed every page with the cheap Android phone her grandson had bought her last Christmas. She replaced the folder exactly where she'd found it. She locked the drawer with the spare key she'd had made 3 years earlier. She finished her shift. She went home. She didn't sleep. She made copies. She drove the originals to a safe deposit box in Berkeley that Elijah had opened in 2009 and forgotten to close. The bank had been mailing notices to her address for 14 years. She placed the evidence inside. She wrote a letter, sealed it, and addressed it to a federal prosecutor in San Francisco she'd been quietly corresponding with for 8 months. And then she went back to work the next night and emptied Marcus Vance's trash. He never noticed. He never noticed her. He had never, in 6 years, asked her name. What Diane didn't know was that the prosecutor had already opened a sealed grand jury investigation. What she didn't know was that 2 of Marcus's former lawyers had begun cooperating. What she didn't know was that the journalist from Wired was about to publish a 14,000-word expose in 72 hours. What she didn't know was that everything she'd patiently built over 6 years was about to converge in a single morning. The morning Marcus Vance would throw a coffee cup at a 67-year-old black woman and discover that his entire universe rested on what she chose to say next. The morning began like any other. 6:50 am. Diane was buffing the marble outside the executive suite when Marcus Vance stormed out of the elevator. His face was the color of paper. His tie was undone. He'd been on the phone since 4 am. The wired piece had dropped overnight. His lawyer had been calling every 12 minutes. His stock was down 19% and falling. 3 board members had requested an emergency meeting. And Marcus Vance, who had built his empire on his ability to terrorize anyone weaker than himself into submission, needed something to break. He saw Diane. He saw the slow circular motion of the buffer on marble that suddenly seemed to make the loudest sound in the world. He saw a woman who would not fight back. And he snapped. "Clean faster, you useless woman." The coffee cup left his hand before he'd finished the sentence. It missed her face by inches and shattered against the marble column. Hot coffee soaked the front of her uniform. Diane felt the burn against her stomach. She felt the sting in her eyes. She felt 67 years of swallowed dignity rise up in her throat like bile. 3 executives stepped out of the conference room. 2 more emerged from the elevator. A receptionist froze halfway to her desk. Henrietta from HR, walking toward her morning meeting, stopped in the middle of the corridor with her hand over her mouth. 23 witnesses, then 25, then 30 as more doors opened. Marcus didn't care. He took 2 steps toward Diane, pointing at the spilled coffee. "You think I pay you to crawl around like a slug? You think you can take 6 hours to mop 1 floor? I will have you fired by lunchtime. I will have your kind out of this building by the end of the week. Now clean it faster." Spit flew from his lips. His face was inches from hers. Diane Carter set down her buffer. She straightened her back. She was 5'3". He was 6'1". She had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. And in those eyes, she saw what her son had seen in the last week of his life. The casual cruelty of a man who believed the world owed him everything, and the people in it nothing. She took one breath. She thought about Elijah. She thought about her grandson. She thought about the manila folder in Berkeley, and the prosecutor, and the Wired article, and the 6 years of patient, invisible labor. And she leaned forward until her lips were 3 inches from Marcus Vance's ear. "I am Elijah Carter's mother. I have the December 6th memo." 7 words. That was all. She straightened back up. She picked up her buffer. She turned and walked toward the supply closet to change her coffee-soaked uniform, leaving Marcus Vance standing in the middle of the corridor in front of 30 witnesses. Marcus didn't move. His face went white, then gray, then a strange greenish color none of the witnesses had ever seen on a human face before. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His hand reached for the marble column to steady himself, and his knees buckled visibly. A slow collapse caught on 3 different security cameras and witnessed by every executive who would later testify against him. He stumbled. He gripped the column. His Patek Philippe slid from his wrist and clattered onto the floor. He didn't bend to pick it up. He couldn't. He whispered something to himself that the closest witness, a junior VP named Carla Mendez, would later swear under oath sounded like no, 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 no. Sweat broke out across his forehead in visible beads. His left hand pawed at his chest like he was trying to find his heart and confirm it was still beating. Carla Mendez took a step back. The receptionist, who had not moved in 2 full minutes, finally lowered her hand from her mouth. Henrietta from HR turned to the executive standing beside her, a man named David Friedman, and said in a voice loud enough for 3 people to hear, "Oh my God." The article was true. Marcus's head snapped toward her. The look on his face was no longer rage. It was the look of a man watching his own funeral. His phone began ringing in his pocket. He didn't answer. It rang again. He didn't answer. By the third call, the building's head of security was running down the corridor toward him, and behind security, two men in dark suits with FBI credentials clipped to their belts. The agents had been waiting in the lobby for 20 minutes. They had a warrant for Marcus Vance's arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. They had a separate warrant for the contents of his office, specifically the bottom left drawer of his desk. They had not expected to witness their suspect publicly assault a janitor moments before his arrest. They would later describe it as the most useful, unforced confession they had ever observed. The lead agent, a 15-year veteran named Antonio Reyes, glanced down at Marcus's trembling hands, then over at Diane Carter in her coffee-soaked uniform, then back at Marcus. His expression shifted into something close to pity. He had seen many men collapse during arrest. He had never seen one collapse before the cuffs were on. "Marcus Vance, you are under arrest." The lead agent didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Marcus's hands were already trembling so badly that the handcuffs took 2 attempts to fasten. The cold steel rattled against his wrist. He flinched at the sound. His $8,000 Italian shoes squeaked against the marble as Agent Reyes positioned him. A second agent began reading him his Miranda rights in a flat, professional tone. Marcus didn't seem to hear. He was staring at the floor. The 30 witnesses, now closer to 50 as word spread through the building and people quietly emerged from offices, watched in absolute silence as the most feared CEO in Silicon Valley was walked toward the elevator in cuffs, his Patek Philippe now in an evidence bag held by a third agent, his face the color of wet ash. Someone in the back of the crowd began to cry. Someone else began, very quietly, to clap. The clapping stopped almost immediately, suppressed by the gravity of the moment. But Marcus heard it. His shoulders flinched at the sound the way a man flinches at gunfire. Halfway to the elevator, he stopped. He turned. His eyes searched the corridor and found Diane Carter standing in the doorway of the supply closet, holding a folded, clean uniform, watching him with an expression he had never seen on a human face before. Not triumph, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just the quiet, terrible patience of a woman who had outlasted him by 6 years and 1 whispered sentence. He opened his mouth. He tried to speak. The only word that came out was a hoarse, half-formed syllable that might have been please. Diane looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned, very deliberately, and stepped into the supply closet, closing the door behind her with a soft click that echoed down the marble corridor. "Mrs. Carter." The voice came from behind Diane. She turned. Henrietta from HR was standing there with tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Carter, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Diane reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's all right, honey. You couldn't have known." She walked past Henrietta and into the supply closet to change. Within 48 hours, the story had crossed every news network on Earth. The Wired journalist's piece, combined with Diane Carter's 6-year evidence cache and the cooperating testimony of 2 former Vance Technologies lawyers, produced an indictment so airtight that even Marcus's $7,000 an hour defense team called it unwinnable. The federal prosecutor in San Francisco announced charges that included murder for hire. The discovery of a man named Doyle Wexler, who had pushed Elijah Carter down a parking garage stairwell in December 2010 for a payment of $400,000 wired from a Marcus Vance shell company in the Caymans. Doyle Wexler had been dying of pancreatic cancer in a Nevada hospice for 6 weeks. He had nothing left to lose. He testified for 3 hours and named every name. Marcus Vance was denied bail. Within 10 days, Vance Technologies had filed an emergency motion to remove his name from every founding document and restore the original 2010 patent filings in the name of Elijah Carter, deceased. 3 months later, Diane Carter walked into Vance Tower one final time. Except it wasn't Vance Tower anymore. The lobby sign had been removed. The new sign, installed the previous week, read Carter Labs. Above the founder's portrait in the lobby, restored from a photograph her daughter-in-law had kept, Elijah Carter smiled out at a building he had designed and never lived to enter. Diane stood in front of the portrait for a long time. Her grandson Malik, now 22 and a senior at Howard, stood beside her holding her hand. The interim CEO, a woman named Renee Park, who had been Elijah's college roommate and who Diane had personally recommended to the restructured board, approached quietly. "Mrs. Carter, we're ready when you are." Diane had been asked to take a permanent seat on the board of directors. She had refused a salary. She had asked instead that the board establish a foundation in Elijah's name that funded scholarships for black engineers from working-class backgrounds. The first 50 scholarships had been awarded the week before. She had asked, almost as an afterthought, that her old janitorial supervisor, a woman named Rosa, who had defended her against 3 of Marcus Vance's previous tantrums, be promoted to head of facilities with a salary triple her previous one. The board had agreed in 15 seconds. A year after Marcus Vance's arrest, he was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The sentencing judge gave him 65 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. He would die in custody. The settlement that Carter Labs paid to the Carter family, Diane, her daughter-in-law, and Malik, totaled $340 million, every penny extracted from Marcus Vance's personal accounts and offshore holdings. Diane donated $300 million of it to the Elijah Carter Foundation. She kept enough to pay for Malik's medical school, to update her reading glasses prescription, and to buy a small house in Oakland, 3 blocks from the one Elijah had grown up in. She kept her own car, a 2011 Honda Civic with 180,000 miles. She kept her schedule of waking at 5:30 a.m. She kept everything that had made her who she was. Every Tuesday morning, Diane drove from Oakland to Palo Alto for the Carter Labs board meeting. She sat at the head of a table her son had once dreamed of building. She listened. She asked careful questions. She remembered every name, of every executive, of every assistant, of every person who brought her coffee, and every person who emptied the trash. Once, in her second month on the board, a new junior VP made the mistake of waving away the cleaning woman who had come to refill the conference room water carafe. Diane stopped the meeting. She stood up. She walked over to the cleaning woman, whose name was Lourdes, and asked her how her morning was going. Lourdes, bewildered, said it was going fine. Diane thanked her. She returned to her seat. She looked at the junior VP and said quietly, "Her name is Lourdes. Learn it. Use it. If I ever see you fail to greet a member of this building staff again, you will not work here the following morning." The junior VP turned the color of paper. He never made the mistake again. The marble floors of Carter Labs were polished every night by a custodial team that earned a starting wage of $36 an hour, full health insurance, and free tuition reimbursement at any college within driving distance. Most evenings, around 10:47 p.m., the old time when Diane had emptied Marcus Vance's trash, the night supervisor would do his rounds and find an elderly woman sitting quietly in the lobby, beneath the portrait of her son. She'd nod at him. He'd nod back. He'd say, "Good evening, Mrs. Carter." She'd say, "Good evening, Terrence. How's your daughter doing in school?" And Terrence would smile and tell her, and they would talk for a few minutes about ordinary things. Then Diane would stand and walk slowly out of the lobby her son had designed, into the California night. The marble behind her gleamed under the lights. The sign above the door read Carter Labs, and somewhere in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Marcus Vance was beginning the 43rd year of a sentence he would not survive to finish. Still, every night hearing 7 whispered words at the edge of sleep, still feeling his knees buckle beneath him. Still learning, slowly, the cost of never asking a woman her name.